Hi, my name is Jess Garcia and I'm the worship pastor here at New Abbey NoHo. Today's message is on community. Building healthy communities can be hard, but it's worth the effort. Today we want to resist the temptation to over-valorize the community in Acts, but instead we're going to look at the life of Jesus and see what his life teaches us about community. And the question for today is to think about a community that really formed you. Take a moment, press pause, and when you're ready, press play and enjoy the message by our pastor, Darren McKenna.
So after I graduated, I lived in a house with 8 other guys. And kind of the goal behind the house was for it to be a ministry center, a place where we did things for the church. We hosted house churches. I hosted one there, and there were at least one, maybe 2. I can't even keep up with the number of small group and house churches that kind of happened out of that space. And we wanted to be a community. We wanted to have groceries together, and we kind of all chipped in and would go shopping and all of that kind of stuff, and share the groceries in the house. And we tried to figure out what healthy community was. And it was very, very important to us that it was a healthy Christian community, right? So what's interesting, what happened was that one of the house churches was a college house church. There were a couple college guys in the house, and the rest of us had just recently graduated or a couple years out. And the college house church really liked to sing worship music until 2 a.m. And they would love to have multiple instruments and have 20, 30 people there all singing. They'd have drums, they'd have guitars, and they would go and they'd pray. And I remember, because I would have work the next day, I would have to go into an office at 8 a.m. I talked to my roommate who was kind of leading that house church, and I said, hey, do you think we could not do that until 2 a.m.? I would like to sleep and actually be functioning for my job. And the response I got had something to do with, it's really important that we're able to pray and worship. That's what makes us a healthy community. Well, so, that was frustrating, and I didn't really feel honored, all that kind of stuff. Roommate drama, it happens. It's a house of 8 guys. Like, what did I expect? But on top of that, I started to leave the house on those nights that that house church happened just because it was loud. So I'd go do homework at a coffee shop, or I guess I wasn't doing homework then, but doing work, or maybe I was just because I was a nerd. Probably was just studying theology because I could. And I would come back probably 10 or 11, sometimes even 12 o'clock, just so I could miss a majority of kind of what felt like a very loud evening every week in this house. Well, I remember one week I come back and I get up to my room. They're still going, they're singing, they're praying. And I get up to my room and there's somebody in my room, 2 people in my room having a very serious, important conversation, sitting on my bed. And I knew these people, and the fact that they were in my room, boundaries, privacy, those are all great things, but wasn't the thing that really bugged me that evening, but it was the ask that, could I come back in a few minutes so that they could finish their conversation? Could I leave my own room to come back? And these are just a couple examples of what it was like living in that community for that year. And my question to you is, does that sound like healthy community? Does that sound like Christian community? Well, let's fast forward a couple years. I just figured out that I was going to have to leave my church very soon because of my sexuality. And I am living with a friend of mine who really made some space for me to process and to grieve what was happening. And it was a friend that had already left the church at large a couple years before that. I told this friend that I was thinking about moving home for a while so that I could save up money and make my big move out west to go to seminary, all of these things. And for him, he knew that would not have been really a life-giving living situation for me. And he offered to pay a little extra in rent just so that I could afford to live still in the city. And over the next year, he continued to create space for me, as did other people who would line up just to give me hugs after a hard Sunday because they knew that I was wrestling with even being in that space anymore. right? This is also a person who would watch TVN with me and drink whiskey and yell at the TV just to have some of that catharsis, those deep, deep moments. And we did that way often than I'd like to admit, if I'm honest. But my question to you is, does that sound like healthy community? Does that sound like Christian community? You see, Christians and churches are all looking to create healthy communities, distinctive communities that reflect the values that they espouse, the values of Jesus, right? And so frequently when Christians talk about communities, they'll look directly to Acts, and they'll look and say, oh, they eat together. They're in each other's houses every day. They pray together. They give up everything they have and share everything. And they put forth this Acts model of living in community as if it's the only way to live in a healthy, life-giving, God-honoring, Jesus-centered community. And I tell those two stories, and I'm obviously painting some broad strokes here, but because the one community was literally doing that in each other's houses and praying and eating food together and sharing with one another, all of these things. But was that community healthy? In my experience, it was not. It was not a life-giving space for me. In fact, I ran out of that community. As a pastor, I was not finding life in a community like that had more value on this idea of singing loudly than it did on my livelihood and being able to show up to work and actually be a healthy person in the morning, right? And so I want to pull us away from this idea when we're talking about what it means to be a community, that Acts is the only way. We're not just supposed to translate Acts into 2021 and live exactly like that, and that is what being a community looks like. Being a community is going to look so different because we are in Los Angeles in 2021 in the midst of a global pandemic. I know I've said that so often over the last few weeks, but it doesn't make it less true. All of these dynamics are radically changing how we view and how we approach community. There are so many of you I've never, ever met in person online, right? There are so many of you that I've never shared a meal with, that I've never given a hug to. And part of me really hates that because I recognize those things fill me up. They fill up emotionally and relationally and socially who I am as a person, and they're good for me. But they're not the only parts of community. Those are not the only values we have when we come into our communities. So I want us to talk about what it looks like to be a healthy community. And I really want to focus us in on the way that Jesus had a community. We just finished a series that lasted almost a full year in the book of Mark, looking at the life of Jesus. And we looked at the kinds of people who followed him. And we looked at the kinds of things they did. So I'm going to pull from a lot of that. And I'm just going to talk through some of these elements. And if you want to look further into them, just go back and listen to one of our other sermons from last year on YouTube or Facebook. But we're going to look at what it means to be a Jesus community, right? That's a part of our mission statement. We're going to talk about what it means for us to be a healthy community. So when I look at the community of Jesus, first thing I want us to look at is who is a part of the community of Jesus. That's really important to see who Jesus was including, because we talk about it being an ever-inclusive ministry, right? An ever-inclusive community. There were sex workers there. There were tax collectors, people who were a kind of part of the system there. Now, I would say that the people that were a part of the system had, for the most part, taken a step back from the system that they were a part of before to follow Jesus. There were fishermen there. There were political revolutionaries in the community. There were just rural farm workers. There were the sick and the lame and the impoverished. There were outcasts. That is the makeup of the community that followed Jesus. We talked about the word that Mark uses often when talking about the people who follow Jesus. He uses this Greek word achlas, which really does connote this sense of just like commoners, right? The regular people. But we know from some descriptions of some of his followers that it wasn't all just the commoners. There were people from all walks of life. But it seemed like the place where Jesus drew the line of the community were with the people who continued to perpetuate harmful systems and oppressive systems. That seemed to be a line for Jesus. It's why he could look at some people and say, you're not far from the kingdom of God, but you're also not there yet, right? And that's okay. People are on their journey and they encounter Jesus, or they encounter Jesus-centered communities, and it changes them and transforms them. But maybe they don't have what it takes at that moment to be able to step back from the ways that they are doing harm to others, right? And we celebrate their journey forward and we ask them to keep going. So you have to recognize this community is a community of sinners. It's a community of people on the margins. It's a community of people who don't quite fit in. And I think that's a beautiful thing, and that we're not going to push people away just because they're living in a way that we don't understand. And especially in a community where so many of us have experienced that kind of marginalization or otheredness, even especially within church communities. But beyond talking about who makes up the community of Jesus, we need to talk about what their core values were. What did Jesus teach these people often? And this was very much implied in who was a part of the community, was a social critique, a critique of society. Jesus was very much not for systems of exclusion just based on ability or based on finances or economics. Jesus was not into exclusion based on line of work. Jesus was very inclusive of those things and critiqued the kind of society that would say those people need to stay over there in their own communities. And also inherent, especially in the book of Mark, but all through all four Gospels, is this political critique. Jesus often alluded to the power of Caesar and the power of Rome, or the power of the ecclesial, the church leaders, the ecclesial elites, the people who were instituting systems of oppression even within the temple. And Jesus frequently critiqued that kind of bureaucracy, that kind of power structure. And he would frequently say that that's not the way of God, and that is not the kingdom of God. And we also see in Jesus' values that he tried to transfer over to this community healthy relationships. Jesus talks about forgiveness. Jesus talks about love. Jesus talks about do unto others as you would have them do to you, right? All of these healthy relational dynamics, those were talked about by Jesus, right? Jesus was talking about trying to be the kind of person that brings people along and not the kind of person that makes someone else stumble, right? The kind of person who is more like a lamp, right, that shines, rather than the kind of person that puts a basket on a lamp so it can't shine. There are all sorts of ways that Jesus was very concerned with how these people were relating with each other, and in particular, asking people to not look at themselves higher than others, but to look at everybody with the lens of equality, with the lens of love and acceptance. And another key moment or another key value for Jesus was talking about connection with God and love for God, and this common understanding in the community of being connected to who God is in the kingdom of God. This framework we have for human flourishing, this framework we have for living life in such a way that everybody is included and recognizes that they too belong to God, just as God is within them, right? This was very important, and we can't leave that out of that community. And that's what I love about us being a part of a faith community, is because we get to bring in that understanding. But beyond that, what did this community of Jesus do? This community would feed people when they were hungry, right? They had money that they would specifically set aside to feed the poor. And they would do miracles, or Jesus would do a miracle when there was an entire crowd that looked hungry. Right? There was an element of care that they did. They also would heal the sick and cast out demons. And in effect, they expended their energy. They spent their time trying to help people identify what is the thing that is keeping them from being able to flourish and helping them get beyond those obstacles. right? This is a community that was very oriented towards caring for each other and caring for the people on the outside. And all this to say, I think there are some values that I want us to talk about or to have in our community when it comes to this. A lot of these are, yes, there are way more values, but these are values I see in the community of Jesus, the people that follow Jesus, that I found really important and I found very poignant. And I've seen themselves work themselves out in this community and other communities and bear some really beautiful fruit. The first value is solidarity, and that's solidarity with people who have experiences that we don't understand, advocating for them, caring for them, recognizing especially those that are oppressed in some way, shape, or form, or exist inside a system that doesn't have space for them, that we stand with them so that they are not alone, right? That we put ourselves out there for the sake of the other, whoever that is for you. Another value is generosity. I see this very generous giving of self, but also giving of excess, giving of money, of food, of clothes, material items in that Jesus community. And no, this doesn't mean that we have to follow that Acts model, as we said, of everything that you had was for everyone else, right? That was the way that they practiced at that time. Well, and it didn't continue very long either, right? But we can have the conversation about what does it look like for you to be generous with your time, your energy, with whatever you find yourself with excess, right? How do you give of yourself, give love, right? Give care, even when it might be hard, but when you recognize it's within your power and ability. And another value is honesty. I see Jesus being a fierce truth teller to the people in his community, right? And we need to name a few things about honesty. Uncontrolled self-disclosure is not the same as honesty, right? That can actually be very unhealthy and unhelpful to both yourself and others around you. But honesty about who you are, and especially in the places where it's appropriate and needed and offers something, is a game changer for a community. That it's not a community built on secrets, but a community built on mutual trust, because we understand that when it comes down to it, we tell the truth to each other. And I love saying this, but I am in community with people that disagree with a lot of the things that I say or believe. There are people that I love that find themselves in very different places. And the best way forward I've found with them is by being honest about our differences, because when we're honest about that, we're able to put it on the table. We're not scared of each other, and we can choose to move towards each other in love. This honesty piece is, whereas we learn honesty from a young age, it doesn't mean we're really good at practicing that. We're very good at hiding things and keeping secrets as humans. And instead of doing the work to figure out how to tell the truth and what things maybe are just private for you or in like a couple people or whatever that is, we just have secrets, and those secrets can often cause a lot of pain, right? Another value is accountability, that we're able to check each other, that we recognize that there are standards that we agree on that we want to be held accountable to. I think that's really healthy in a community. Now, that doesn't mean you're allowed to have a standard for somebody else and then try to hold them to that standard and assume that they may agree with you. No, this is about the stuff that we've indicated that we agree on and we're together in this value. And then, yes, that accountability is so important, right? We need accountable structures in society, and especially in our faith communities, so that we stop doing harm as faith communities. Another value is mutuality. I see everybody participating and giving to each other in the Jesus community. And I think that's really important, that this isn't a one-sided relationship. One-sided relationships aren't relationships, right? That's a dependency. And we really believe in mutuality, that as you give, you take, and others will give, and others will take, and together we build something bigger because we're all in this together. And the final value that I see in the Jesus community is just care. And we've said this often, but I think it's really important, because it's a huge part of the pastoral setting and being a part of a congregation, of a people, a community that has access to pastoral individuals, right? We want to care for each other. We want to hold space for each other in the journeys that we're on. We want to listen well and we want to serve well. And I think that's a really important piece to make sure that we never lose sight of in this community. As we grow and change, may we always care well for the people that we have and the people that we're in contact with. There's this phrase that I first heard at New Abbey, Pasadena. Maybe Corey came up with it, I'm not sure, or he got it from somewhere else, but it's a huge piece of their DNA. And I think it really encapsulates a lot of these values that we were just talking about. And it's that we're a rowboat, not a cruise ship. And I think that's really important. I think that's a really good frame for us to be thinking about this community. See, because rowboats need everybody to be paddling. The rowboat doesn't get anywhere, or it's not even steered anywhere if everyone's not doing the work that they are supposed to do, right? This rowboat metaphor means that maybe some of you have actually been rowing for a very long time in other places. You've done a lot of work and you're tired and you've never had a chance to rest. Well, on this rowboat, you can just lay out in the center of the boat while other people row for you. And that is good news. Or maybe you're doing so much work in other places. Maybe you're someone who's doing the work of LGBTQ inclusion in other churches and are coming here for health and coming here for a sense of being fulfilled and accepted for who you are. And maybe this space for you is just a space for you to lie down because you're rowing in so many other places, right? The idea is that this isn't just, I'm not a cruise director. Our team is not here just to create a pleasant experience, but it's just here to make sure that we're functioning well as a community. One of the great gifts of being in a community, in a church setting, is that sometimes you just need to be carried along. You don't have the energy to keep it up yourself, and the church can do that for you. But the other great gift of being in a church community is it's a place where you are able to participate and grow and transform. And so that's who we are as a community. We are a Jesus community. These values of solidarity, accountability, honesty, of care, right? And the other values we talked about, these practices of inclusion, us working together, that us being a rowboat that allows people to rest, and that also we do our work, that we work together, and together we figure out where we're going. This is who we are as a community. And this is what we're striving to build out and to become more of. So I want us to go back into our groups and talk about that a little bit. What role can you play in this community? In what ways do you want to participate in making this a Jesus community or a more Jesus-like community? And if you're not sure right now, that's fine. Talk about anything that stuck out to you in this conversation. But let's start having those healthy conversations about healthy community where we're doing this together. And we remember that. And we figure out what that community looks like in a place like LA in 2021. So go into your groups and we'll come back in a couple minutes and share as a larger group.
Thank you for joining us. Follow us on Instagram at New Abbey NoHo. And if you're interested in giving to New Abbey NoHo, feel free to head over to www.newabbey.org/generosity. Be sure to scroll down to the North Hollywood Fund. Thank you, and have a blessed week.